John Gotti, the Dapper Don who ruled the underworld. John Gotti, famously known as the Dapper Don, wasn't your typical mob boss. Unlike most of his underworld counterparts, Gotti reveled in the spotlight. His nickname, the Dapper Don, came from his impeccable fashion sense and charisma, which made him a household name and an icon in New York City. Always dressed in expensive, tailor-made suits and sporting a confident grin, the Dapper Don appeared more like a celebrity than a crime lord. Yet beneath the charm and style lay a ruthless gangster who led the Gambino crime family, one of the most powerful and feared organizations in the country. Gotti's life story is a fascinating journey through the dark, hidden corners of organized crime in America. If you're enjoying this video so far, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. Early life and humble beginnings. John Joseph Gotti Jr. was born on October 27, 1940, in the South Bronx neighborhood of New York City. His parents were Italian immigrants who struggled to make ends meet. Growing up as one of 13 siblings in a poor family, Gotti learned early on about hardship and survival. The family moved frequently from the Bronx to Brooklyn, and John's father, who worked as a day laborer, could barely support his large family. By the time he was a teenager, Gotti was already a product of his environment. The streets of New York City during the 1950s were filled with opportunities for young men like him to make quick money, and the allure of crime was everywhere. Gotti began his criminal career with small-time thefts, often stealing from neighborhood stores with a gang of friends. This gang would later become the Fulton Rockaway Boys, a local crew of teenage troublemakers who engaged in petty crime. Yet for young John, this was just the beginning. Even then, he exhibited traits that would later define him as one of the most notorious mob bosses in America: ambition, fearlessness, and a knack for getting people to follow him. A rising star in the Gambino crime family, John Gotti's big break came when he crossed paths with members of the Gambino crime family, one of the 5 families that dominated organized crime in New York. The Gambino family was deeply involved in a variety of illegal activities, including extortion, loan sharking, gambling, drug trafficking, and labor racketeering. Gotti's charisma and determination caught the attention of Agnello Della Croce, the family's underboss, who became a mentor and father figure to him. Della Croce taught Gotti the rules of the mob world, emphasizing loyalty and respect for the family hierarchy. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, Gotti quickly rose through the ranks of the Gambino family. He handled collections, or making sure businesses paid their dues to the family. He also became involved in loan sharking, a lucrative but dangerous business that involved lending money at extremely high interest rates and using violence to collect payments from those who didn't pay up. His skills as an enforcer earned him respect within the family, and his reputation as a ruthless operator grew. One incident that solidified Gotti's reputation involved James McBratney, a gangster who had kidnapped a nephew of the Gambino boss at the time, Carlo Gambino. When McBratney refused to pay the family a ransom, Gotti and 2 associates took it upon themselves to deal with him. They tracked down McBratney and killed him in a public bar in Staten Island in 1973, marking Gotti's first major hit for the family. Although he was caught and served a short prison sentence, this act won him the respect of his superiors. It was the start of a bloody career that would make him feared throughout the underworld. The takeover killing the boss. By the mid-1980s, the Gambino family was led by Paul Castellano, a business-minded boss who was seen by many as too distant and conservative. Castellano was known for running the family more like a corporation than a street gang, which didn't sit well with Gotti and others who wanted a more hands-on, action-oriented leader. Additionally, Castellano banned the family's involvement in drug trafficking, a rule that Gotti and his crew ignored because of the huge profits involved. Gotti's growing influence and resentment of Castellano's leadership eventually led him to plan a bold and risky move. In December 1985, Gotti orchestrated the assassination of Paul Castellano. The hit was a highly publicized event. Castellano and his underboss were shot to death outside Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan. It was a brutal power grab, the likes of which hadn't been seen in the mob world for decades. Within days, Gotti declared himself the new boss of the Gambino family, solidifying his position as the most powerful mobster in New York City. The criminal empire under Gotti's rule. Under John Gotti's rule, the Gambino family flourished but also became bolder and more visible. Gotti's version of the mob was aggressive, and he didn't shy away from taking risks or using violence. The family was deeply involved in extortion, loan sharking, and labor racketeering. They controlled the docks, construction sites, and even garbage collection routes, enforcing strict territorial rules and taking cuts from businesses that operated on their turf. One of the biggest sources of income was drug trafficking. While Gotti publicly claimed to be against drugs, many members of his crew were deeply involved in heroin and cocaine trafficking, which was highly profitable. Gotti preferred to keep his distance from this, knowing the risks, but allowed it as long as it brought money to the family. Despite his stance, he couldn't avoid the fact that drugs played a huge role in financing his organization. In addition to drugs, Gotti's crew engaged in gambling operations, running underground casinos and sports betting rings throughout New York. Illegal gambling brought in millions of dollars annually, and Gotti's men made sure every business in their territory paid up. If anyone dared to go against them, Gotti's enforcers were quick to use violence. Gotti's reputation for ruthlessness meant few people dared cross him, solidifying his control over his empire. The Dapper Don in media frenzy. Gotti was not just a feared crime boss, he was also a media sensation. Known as the Dapper Don because of his stylish appearance, he became famous for his expensive, custom-made suits and his confident, charming demeanor. Unlike other mob bosses who stayed in the shadows, Gotti seemed to love the attention. He often posed for photographers outside the courthouse, waving to crowds and smiling for cameras as though he were a celebrity rather than a criminal. Gotti's public appearances made him a kind of anti-hero figure, and he developed a fan base who admired his style and boldness. His court appearances turned into media spectacles, and he became one of the most recognized faces in the country. This unusual level of visibility was risky, however. Law enforcement took notice, and the FBI became more determined than ever to bring him down. The Teflon Don and his infamous trials. Despite being arrested numerous times, Gotti seemed untouchable for years, earning himself yet another nickname, the Teflon Don. He managed to avoid conviction in 3 major trials between 1985 and 1990, each time walking free despite mounting evidence against him. Gotti's legal team, led by the highly skilled and loyal Bruce Cutler, was instrumental in winning these cases. They aggressively defended Gotti, using his charm and public persona to sway juries. There were even rumors of jury tampering, bribery, and intimidation, which helped Gotti escape convictions. The FBI, however, was not about to give up. They placed wiretaps in the Ravenite Social Club, a Manhattan club where Gotti and his associates often met. These recordings captured Gotti discussing various crimes, including the murders he had ordered. The FBI also managed to secure a major breakthrough when Sammy the Bull, Gotti's underboss, agreed to testify against him in exchange for a lighter sentence. Sammy the Bull's testimony detailed Gotti's involvement in numerous murders, including the assassination of Paul Castellano. In 1992, Gotti's luck ran out. He was found guilty on all charges, including murder, racketeering, and tax evasion, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This was the end of the Teflon Don's reign. Life in prison and final years. Sentenced to life in prison, Gotti was transferred to the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois. Although he was no longer free, he retained some influence over the Gambino family and reportedly continued to direct operations from his prison cell. However, life behind bars was a far cry from the luxurious lifestyle he had enjoyed as the Dapper Don. In prison, he was isolated from other inmates, placed in a small cell for 23 hours a day, with little contact with the outside world. In the early 2000s, Gotti's health began to deteriorate. He was diagnosed with throat cancer, a disease that ultimately claimed his life in 2002. His death marked the end of an era, but his legacy remained. Gotti's life story became a source of fascination, spawning books, documentaries, and movies. He is remembered as one of the most notorious and charismatic mob bosses in American history, a man who achieved power and fame, but ultimately paid the price. Legacy and impact on popular culture. John Gotti's story has had a lasting impact on popular culture. His flashy lifestyle, combined with his brutal crimes, made him a symbol of the modern mobster, a larger-than-life character whose life was as dramatic as any Hollywood movie. Gotti's rise and fall have been chronicled in numerous films and TV shows, including the popular crime drama The Sopranos, which was partially inspired by the real-life stories of mob bosses like Gotti. His story is a reminder of the dangers and allure of mob life, a lifestyle that promises power and wealth, but often ends in prison or death. Gotti's legacy also serves as a lesson for law enforcement. His ability to evade justice for so long showed the challenges of prosecuting organized crime, but his eventual conviction demonstrated that even the most powerful mob bosses could be brought down. John Gotti, the Dapper Don, remains one of the most memorable figures in the history of organized crime. His story is a blend of power, crime, and charisma, with a cautionary tale woven through it. Gotti's life is a complex web of ambition, violence, and a desire for fame that ultimately led to his downfall. While he captivated the public and built an empire, he ultimately paid the price for his crimes, spending his final years in isolation. The legacy of the Dapper Don lives on as a symbol of the allure and danger of the mob world, an American story that captures the dark side of the pursuit of power. The aftermath of Gotti's conviction, a changing underworld. The conviction of John Gotti in 1992 marked a significant turning point in the world of organized crime in the United States. For decades, the mafia had operated almost like a secret society, with strict codes of silence, family loyalty, and brutal efficiency that made them nearly untouchable by law enforcement. But Gotti's high-profile life and eventual downfall exposed cracks within the mob's long-standing traditions. His dramatic rise and fall symbolized the end of an era for organized crime, which had to evolve in the face of a more aggressive and technologically savvy law enforcement approach. Gotti's conviction led to a weakened Gambino family. Once the most powerful of New York's 5 families, the Gambino organization suffered without Gotti's forceful leadership, and many of his loyalists found themselves either in prison or out of favor in the changing underworld. The family tried to regain its power, but with increasing pressure from the FBI and changing criminal enterprises, it became nearly impossible for any mob boss to gain the type of public influence Gotti once wielded. His downfall underscored the reality that the government was no longer willing to tolerate the mafia's existence, and that the once powerful families would be held accountable for their crimes. Law enforcement's response: new tactics for a new generation. Gotti's conviction didn't just impact the underworld, it also shifted the strategies of law enforcement agencies, particularly the FBI, which had made bringing down the mafia a top priority. The use of wiretaps, surveillance, and informants became key tactics in the fight against organized crime, as Gotti's case demonstrated the effectiveness of wiretap evidence and cooperation from insiders like Sammy Gravano. These techniques were relatively new in the battle against the mob, but became standard practices following Gotti's trial. The Gotti model of targeting the top boss and using informants to gain insight into criminal operations became the blueprint for law enforcement across the country. The FBI expanded its organized crime units, focusing on financial investigations to trace illegal profits, and collaborated more closely with local police and international agencies to combat the increasingly globalized nature of crime. Gotti's highly publicized trial also educated the public on the seriousness of organized crime, garnering support for more funding and resources dedicated to dismantling criminal enterprises. The end of the mafia's golden era. Before Gotti's conviction, the mafia enjoyed an era of unprecedented influence in American society. During this so-called golden era, organized crime held a tight grip on the labor unions, construction industry, and entertainment businesses. The mob's infiltration into legitimate industries allowed it to influence and profit from seemingly law-abiding businesses while shielding its illicit activities from public scrutiny. However, the public exposure of the mafia's reach, thanks to high-profile figures like Gotti, led to public outcry and increased government scrutiny of these industries. Following Gotti's conviction, significant steps were taken to sever the mob's influence over labor unions and large industries. Federal agencies increased their monitoring of unions, imposed regulations on financial transactions, and ensured that legitimate businesses could operate free from mob control. The infamous no-show jobs and extortion payments that had been commonplace were gradually weeded out, forcing the mafia to rethink its revenue streams. As organized crime lost its grip on these sources of income, it struggled to regain the power it once held, and the mafia's presence in American life began to wane. The cultural impact of the Dapper Don. John Gotti's life story has left an indelible mark on American popular culture, and he became an enduring symbol of both the allure and the danger of the mob world. His life and image have inspired countless portrayals in film, television, and literature, solidifying his place as one of the most iconic mobsters in history. From Goodfellas to The Sopranos, Gotti's larger-than-life persona helped shape the public's understanding and fascination with organized crime. One of the most well-known portrayals of Gotti came in the 1996 HBO movie Gotti, where actor Armand Assante played the title role. The film depicted Gotti as a complex character, a ruthless killer, yet a man with his own twisted code of honor. This portrayal cemented Gotti's status as a figure of both admiration and fear. Later films and series would revisit his story, examining the unique charisma he brought to his position and the family loyalty that defined his criminal life. Despite the horrific nature of his crimes, Gotti became a pop culture anti-hero, embodying the concept of the bad guy who lives by his own rules, evading justice for years while mocking the system. The evolution of organized crime after Gotti. The conviction and death of John Gotti marked the decline of the traditional mafia, but did not signal the end of organized crime. Instead, it evolved to adapt to a new world and a changing economy. In the years following Gotti's death, organized crime groups diversified their operations, branching into cybercrime, human trafficking, and global drug distribution. The fall of the Italian-American mafia created a vacuum that other criminal organizations were eager to fill. Russian, Chinese, and Latin American cartels began expanding their influence in the United States, moving into areas once dominated by the five families. These organizations embraced different strategies than the traditional mafia. Unlike Gotti's Gambino family, which operated through strict hierarchies, these new groups often worked in decentralized networks, making them harder to dismantle. They also avoided the flashy displays that characterized Gotti's rule, keeping a low profile to evade the intense scrutiny that had brought down the Italian mafia. Gotti's influence on the modern celebrity criminal. One of the most enduring aspects of John Gotti's legacy is his role in establishing the concept of the celebrity criminal. Before Gotti, mob bosses and gangsters typically avoided public exposure. They preferred anonymity and took pride in conducting their operations quietly. But Gotti was different. His fashion sense, confident demeanor, and media presence turned him into a figure of public intrigue. The media was captivated by him, and the public seemed fascinated by this man who appeared to blend the lifestyle of a Hollywood star with the ruthlessness of a mob boss. Gotti's unique approach has influenced subsequent generations of high-profile criminals who use media attention to cultivate a certain image. Figures like Pablo Escobar, El Chapo, and others who embrace the spotlight bear echoes of Gotti's legacy. This new generation of criminals understands the power of public perception, and like Gotti, sometimes uses it as a tool to spread fear or gain a certain level of infamy. The media's fixation on these figures reflects society's fascination with the bad guys who seemingly operate outside the rules, creating a myth around them that often overshadows the real harm they cause. Reflections on justice and morality. John Gotti's story raises important questions about justice, morality, and the American legal system. Despite being one of the most notorious criminals in modern history, Gotti was admired by some for his audacity and refusal to bend under pressure. His life challenges the public to consider why certain criminals captivate the public imagination and why figures like Gotti are often glamorized, even when their actions are undoubtedly harmful. Gotti's reputation as a Robin Hood figure was largely a myth. He didn't steal from the rich to give to the poor. He used his influence to build a personal empire that thrived on violence, fear, and exploitation. Yet his ability to capture public admiration shows how society sometimes sympathizes with individuals who challenge authority, even when they are criminals. The Dapper Don persona. Gotti fed into this myth, blurring the line between villain and folk hero. At the same time, Gotti's case also exposed weaknesses in the American justice system. For years, he avoided conviction through bribery, intimidation, and legal maneuvering, frustrating authorities and setting a dangerous precedent. His eventual conviction was a major victory for law enforcement. Yet his ability to evade justice for so long revealed the complexities and challenges involved in prosecuting high-profile criminals. The legacy of John Gotti, a cautionary tale. Today, John Gotti remains a powerful symbol of both the allure and the consequences of a life of crime. His story has been told in countless ways, and he is often remembered as the last of the great mob bosses, a man who lived by a code and refused to compromise. Yet, his life is also a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride, the perils of power, and the ultimate cost of a life built on crime. Gotti's legacy lives on not only in the mob world he left behind, but also in the popular imagination. He is a reminder of the thin line between fame and infamy, a figure who sought power and recognition, but ultimately found himself isolated and defeated. His downfall serves as a warning to those who may be drawn to a life of crime, showing that, despite short-term success, the mob world often ends in loss and betrayal. The rise and fall of a modern mob legend. John Gotti, the Dapper Don, is one of the most complex figures in the history of organized crime. He was a man who defied the rules of the underworld, sought out the limelight, and captivated the public with his flamboyant style and ruthless ambition. His life was a dramatic saga of power, fame, and violence that ultimately ended in isolation and defeat. Gotti's story offers a unique insight into the world of organized crime, showing both the allure of mob life and the high price that comes with it. As we look back on Gotti's life and legacy, we are reminded of the shifting landscape of crime in America, the evolving tactics of law enforcement, and the enduring fascination society holds for figures who live outside the law. In the end, John Gotti's life stands as both a celebration and a condemnation of the mob world, a story that captures the glamour and the grit, the power and the price of a life lived on the edge. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Also join the member team for more exclusive content on Underworld Icons.